I want to start off by saying thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to my channel, Words by Lily. It's exciting. I'm getting closer and closer to my requested 30 subscribers so I can get my own URL. So if the content is bringing meaning to your life and you can think of someone else who might be interested, then please share a video with them and ask them to subscribe so I can get my personalized URL, and then life will be perfect, right? So it's been a while. Life happened, as it always does. But fortunately, I already did a video on forgiveness, so you know that I'm not holding myself accountable for being a human. Or I am holding myself accountable for being human, and that's okay. But for a while now, I have wanted to do a video on core values, so that's what I'm going to do today, which I think today is a great time to talk about core values because tomorrow is Valentine's Day. And for women, at least, holidays are, I think holidays are a really good time to sort of check back in with yourself and make sure that what you previously thought your core values were still are, and, you know, update, sort of have that, I guess, meeting with yourself and update what needs to be updated, journal, reflect. So either just before the holiday or just after the holiday is a good time to do that, because holidays can be very stressful emotionally. If you do have children, maybe you're doing things for them, for their classmates, or helping them make Valentine's, or buying them candy, whatever. If you have a partner, maybe this needs to be a special time for the two of you, and that's okay. And just things get piled on during a holiday that are even more elevated emotionally than just regular life, which is already pretty emotional. So make sure you are conscious on holidays of your self-care, maybe elevate those practices, and also just your running dialogue with yourself. What's going on the inside, and how are you responding to that? And maybe reserve a little extra me time, whatever that means. A nap, an eyebrow wax, some art, creativity time, whatever makes you sort of, feel like that. So anyway, we're going to talk about core values, knowing and naming them, and why that is so important when it comes to living intentionally. It's sort of maybe a glaring, obvious principle, but in my opinion, you can't live intentionally if you don't know what your values are. So this is kind of step one, is figuring out, or maybe step one is figuring out I want to live according to my own values, and then the next step to take is to figure out what those values are. Because if you don't know what they are, then you can't check in with them. You can't sort of rely on them as the fulcrum when you're making decisions. And again, just to give you my personal definition of intentional living is thinking before you act. So for me, core values, it comes with the thinking part, right? That I need to, whenever I'm in that step of, what are the feelings I want to have? What's going to happen if I take this action? Is it going to bring me those feelings? Is it going to add to or take away from the life I'm trying to live? Then that's the time when also those values would surface. So knowing your values is important. Naming your values is also important. The last thing we want to do in intentional living is add more noise inside of our head. So once you know what they are up here, be sure to go through a process, whatever works for you, whether it's journaling or an exercise of some sort, where you actually get those core values out on a piece of paper. Or record a video or something. Do something so that those core values aren't just existing inside your head. It's really important to get them out, so they're not a part of that mental load, but there's something that you can refer back to as, a helpmeet. And then the other sort of important reason that I name or know and name my values is because of my personality type. I'm a very passionate person, and I'm inspired by a purpose-filled life. I'm a principled person. That's a lot of P's, but I'm also an English person. I'm a principled person, so I like knowing, okay, these are the things, these are the guidelines, and I'm following those, or am I rebelling against those? And I think what happened, like in the first, let's say 35-ish years of my life, I was all those things. I was principled, and I was passionate, and I was inspired by my purpose. But I was all of those things, but I was on automatic mode with all of those things. So, heavy on the instinct, right? Heavy on like, what is my gut telling me to do? And that helped me survive. That helped get me through, some wackadoo times. And it protected me, from some things that I needed to be protected from. And all that is great. But I wasn't really the person in control. The world was still in control. I was still reacting against whatever was going on in my life. So to actually live intentionally, knowing that passion and that desire for principles and that inspiration by a purpose, knowing that all that was going on to elevate my practice of living intentionally, then I needed to step back and say, what are the values that I want to guide these aspects of my personality? And I think this works with any personality type. Yeah. So whatever your personality type, maybe you could come up with a couple of adjectives to describe yourself. And I think it would be worth going through this sort of what if situation. Well, what if that's my personality type and I'm just coasting along? How does that work? And then what if that's my personality type and I combine that personality type with some core values, and what happens then? I think you'll find that you're living more intentionally, and that you're the one in control. You're acting instead of reacting, and you're thinking before you act. If you need help choosing your core values, I'm not going to go through it now because it can be a very long process. I will say that core values are usually sort of what we would think of as like an abstract concept, like maybe independence or humility, love, freedom, cleanliness, not one of my core values, creativity, stuff like that. So these big ideas and words, okay? These are just like the umbrella of values. So if you don't have a clue what your core values are, or, you have an inkling, but you really want to make sure that you're kind of landing on the right 4 or 5 ones, then I do have an exercise, and I'm happy to share it with you. So just reach out and let me know. You can leave a comment. You can email me at wordsbylily@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, etc. Okay, so what I wanted to do is give you 2 examples of how knowing my values has helped me live more intentionally. And I'll go ahead and put out a disclaimer now that even though I call these values core values, our core values are not always the same. So it's not like a core personality, okay? I think that core personality, how I told you I was passionate and principled and inspired by purpose, I think that's always going to be there. But my core values can shift over time. Core values are dynamic. It has a lot to do with circumstance, with your the life phase that you're in, your age, who your partner is, whether you're mothering, whether you're taking care of your parents. Like, so many different things can influence what your core values are. So we constantly are in conversation with ourselves to make sure that our core values are the same, but also know that we need to be flexible. There needs to be some flexibility there so that when a shift happens, maybe those values might shift too. And we can talk more about that in another video maybe, because I want to go ahead and give you the examples, but I don't want it to sound like these have been our core values forever, or they're gonna be our core values forever, because that's not true. Okay, so 2 examples of how knowing and having our values named helped us to live intentionally. And when I say us, in this first example, I'm talking about really my family, which, though we do involve our kids in discussions about core values, they're not at the age yet where they're necessarily shaping those core values in an overt way. Obviously, they're shaping them by their core personalities, and we have to factor that in. But when I say us in this first example, I really mean my husband and I. So you may or may not know that I started a magazine, a lifestyle magazine. I co-founded it with my sister about 4 years ago, and it's called The Perpetual You. You probably know that. But just in case you don't, check it out at theperpetualyou.com. I was like frigid in my office right now, so my nose is running. So I started this magazine with my sister, and in the first year, basically the magazine took over everything, took over my entire life. All my relationships revolved around the magazine. All of my passion and my principles and my passion and my purpose, they all went towards the magazine, and it was wonderful. It was crazy, and I do not recommend it, but I think it was typical for a first year of a passion project or first year in a startup, so you can imagine what it was like 23 hours a day spent on the magazine, hour of sleep, and then back to it. And when it came time for the second year, so somewhere around April in that first year, I actually took over the magazine and I became managing editor, and really solidified that it was what I wanted to do and what I wanted to put out into the world. And so then came the second year, in August of 2016, or leading up to that. I started thinking, about how great it was, and also how it wasn't sustainable for me to work that much and to ignore all the other parts of my life. That wouldn't be good for the magazine. It's not good for me, and it definitely wasn't good for our family. And I was also doing things like remodeling our house so that I could feature it in the magazine, buying products so I could put them in the magazine. Just a lot of financial, emotional investment, and at a level that, we could no longer sustain as a family, and I could no longer sustain. And I knew this, but I needed to check in with my values and with my partner, as the person who is the most affected. And so we had a session, basically sort of impromptu in the car. And we talked about what it would look like if I kept doing the magazine. I think we both knew intuitively, the level would have to come down. So we talked about what would it look like to keep doing the magazine and not be the only person responsible for every single piece of it. And in doing so, we reconnected with lots of our core values. A few that come to mind are intimacy. So obviously, if I'm spending all my time on another project, then I can't continue to grow my relationship with my husband or my children or really any of my friends. So that was missing, intimacy. And frugality, I don't think at that time that we would have necessarily named frugality as a value. But I definitely think we were both uncomfortable with the amount of money that was going into the magazine. So that's something we would have to change if I was going to keep doing it second year. And then responsibility. And I almost feel like responsibility sort of is a core value that encompasses intimacy and frugality. But basically, I don't think an absence of work-life balance, whatever that means to you, I don't think it's responsible to devote your entire existence to one thing. Just because I think in that case, you're not being responsible to yourself, because that's not what's intended to happen in a human. You know, we're supposed to have different interests. We need different relationships to sustain us. We need to spend time with ourselves. And so really I was letting myself down, unintentionally, you know, because for that year I had been really on autopilot and just so inspired by the mission. And so we decided that we did want to keep going, you know, that because of how fulfilling the magazine was to me, that it was important and almost necessary for our family's health that I keep doing it. So that's a big decision in and of itself. But then the next question was, so how do I do that and do it intentionally so that I'm not, I don't continue to act irresponsibly. I don't continue to put us into debt, and I don't continue to ignore the other relationships in my life. And obviously family too would be a big core value there, that the needs of our family are a priority. And I guess I want to say that I want to point out that as a woman, sometimes the needs of our family feel like they're a separate thing from our own needs. And I don't want to put that message into the world, because that's not what I believe. When I say the needs of our family, I include my own needs in that bucket. So again, this was a decision that met my need, that I guess spoke to my core personality. And then so it was meeting a lot of my needs. But then taking the time to sit with the core values helped me realize it can meet my need to be involved in a passion project without obliterating everything around me. So what happened is I put the word out. I outsourced tons of stuff. I turned the magazine into more of a collaborative vehicle than maybe something that was so focused on being professional and getting funding, or finding an investor. And I just started welcoming in like basically any help I could get. And in that same year, or I guess it was the next year, we started an online marketplace and a blog. And those things couldn't have happened, again, if I had been fully immersed in just the magazine. If I didn't have, the support system around me that I needed to continue publishing the magazine without being irresponsible. So that's the first example. I hope that makes sense to you. It's, if you don't know, like, my personal life story, maybe it doesn't make as much sense to you. But if you know me at all, you know that I dive right in, and sometimes I don't come up for air for a very long time. In this case, for a year. I am so proud of us in that moment, and I would just say that I think another aspect of my core personality is sort of a all or nothing. And I'm so grateful that I found a partner who could, back me off of that cliff and say, like, hey, this can happen. We can still do this, but we can do it according to our values. So, like, a very supportive but also practical person. Doesn't have to be your spouse or your long-term life partner, but find someone and cultivate a relationship with someone who balances out your core personality traits, particularly if the core personality trait has the tendency to take over. So that's just my little life advice for you. Okay, example number 2 is a much more recent one. So fast forward, I'm 4 years into the magazine. And again, we had another sort of session. In this case, I think it was much more sort of, intimate, like with myself. I had come to know myself a lot better over the preceding 3 years. And I was able to make a decision to step back from the magazine just a little bit and have what I would call like a rebuilding year for the magazine. Because, well, that's really complicated. I won't go into that. It's too long. I don't have time. But for many reasons, it was a good time to do that. And I think I was able to come to that decision on my own, and then, to go to my partner and say, hey, does this make sense? Am I reading this situation correctly? And then to get his buy-in and feedback. So as that happened, I received an email from a woman I had just recently met inviting me to take part in an art class for moms. And I will just say it, I'm not an artist, so this was kind of crazy to me, because I was thinking like the class was for moms who are artists. But as I obviously so intrigued by the invitation, as I went to her website and sort of kind of started digging into it, I could just tell that it was going to be something very intimate and socially, like it was going to be another place where my own personal self-care could be elevated, where my personal needs were going to be priority. And so my instinct was to say yes. But before I said yes, I had to check in. Partly because I didn't want to get into the place where I was like jumping into it's like a rebound, right? Like I didn't want to rebound into, okay, now I'm going to take an art class and, go all in there. So I didn't want that to happen. And also I didn't want to just instinctually or based on my gut say, yes, I'll do this, because this is a semester-long commitment. So I wanted to check in with my values to make sure if I say yes today, that it's gonna still feel like a yes, a couple months down the road. So this is a good time. I'm getting close on my time. I might go over 30 minutes, but I think it's a good time just to briefly say that there are sort of 4, when I'm making a decision, there are sort of 4 quadrants that I think assist me in making that decision. So instinct is one of them. Intellect is one of them. So kind of my life experience along with everything I've learned and know about the world. And intuition is one of them. Intuition, I think, is a more of a feminine, divine wisdom kind of quadrant, more of a spiritual discussion. And I'm blanking on the last quadrant. This is why I write things down, because I've had babies. I think the last quadrant might be intention, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, so I check in with these 4 quadrants when I'm making a decision, and I can sort of check off the boxes, right? So the intuition or the instinct was there. But then then I have that discussion with myself. What are the values that are leading me towards saying yes to this decision? What are the feelings I want to have? And in this case, the very clear value that this class would live up to or would live alongside is creativity. And I have been thinking about creativity as a value for probably the previous year. I had started some personal projects that allowed me to be more creative. And we had done a magazine issue sort of on creativity. I don't think we called it that, but it was like our creativity issue. And I had been spending a lot of time almost cultivating that as a value, allowing myself to be creative, allowing my children to be creative. And so that value was like immediately like, yes, of course, an art class would allow me to be creative and to really, up level that desire that I had been cultivating. So that was like a no-brainer. But then there was the, I'm not an artist, inner critic, blather going on. And so another like very recent, I don't know if it's very recent, but another value that has shown up for us in our family because of who our children are and some situations that have gone on for us as a family is bravery. And at the same time, again, as this value we've been cultivating this value in ourselves and our children and sort of investigating what that means, and rewarding ourselves for being brave. I had met Heather Vickery, who does a podcast on being brave, so I have been listening to that. I've read a lot of Brene Brown, who talks about bravery and vulnerability. So that was really the other sort of big flashing light that was like, your inner critic is saying, you're not an artist, therefore you shouldn't take this class. But, my inner critic is just, you can't trust her. So what's actually true is that I'm not an artist, a trained artist, but I am a creative person. And I need outlets for creativity, and I want to grow my creativity, I want to grow my ability to welcome in creativity. And that takes courage. That takes showing up. So in that way, the art class, obviously spoke to, hey, here's a way where on a schedule, once a week for a certain amount of months, with a guide who you can already tell you're kind of going to like, you can explore being brave. And at the same time, speak to that value of creativity. So that's the decision-making process I went through, and you can probably guess that I said yes, and I'm so glad I did. That was about 5 weeks ago, that was about 6 weeks ago that I said yes, and it has been a wonderful, wealthy experience, and obviously very creative. So, I gave my disclaimer. So I wanted to end with kind of an example of a time when our core values shifted. I hope that my examples have been rich enough that you can see that core values are things that you can be initially attracted to, and then you can cultivate them. And if you can cultivate them, then they can also flourish, or they can be set aside and you can cultivate something else. So that's what happened in the case of, I think, one of our very early family values, really before we, when we just had one child, and before we were like fully immersed in this parenthood world. I think my husband and I were both very attracted to the value of independence. And we had discussed, ways in which we could encourage our child to be independent. And let me tell you that is not the case today. On an individual level, I am still so turned on by the idea of independence. And I think that, that just goes with the whole, like, I want to come up with my own rules and I want to follow them. But I think what's shifted is the rigor or let's say the rigidity in which we viewed independence. Obviously we want our children to be able to do things on their own. That's important for our sanity. And it's important that, they figure stuff out just so they can grow as human beings. And we're especially seeing that maybe their desire to be independent sort of waxes and wanes with whatever age and whatever life stage they're in. But the shift that happened there is that we got these two children. The universe gave us these two children who are not, how should I say this? They're not turned on by independence. I'll just say that. We have an introvert who has some social anxiety or some anxiety of some sort. We're still working on that, figuring that out. But basically, someone who needs reassurance, okay? And also partnership. He needs partnership. He lacks, I guess, independent motivation to do things that he's interested in doing. So that's one kid. The other kid is totally extroverted and feeds off of emotional energy of other people. And just from the time he was very little, needed a body next to him to be happy. And that is still true to this day. So that's a core personality feature that is not going away. I always say, if you're sitting next to Wayne, Wayne's sitting on top of you. Like that's who he is. He's very loving and affectionate, but not really independent. Not in the way that I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago we pictured independence in our head. And so what we realized, I think slowly, like this took so much giving up of my own ego. What I realized is that safety, something that both of our kids, all kids need to feel safe, okay? So safety as a value started to trump independence as a value. And so, this is huge. If you're a parent, you've probably experienced, some sort of shift like this. And what happens is it just influences all those micro decisions that you make throughout your day. Am I going to force my kid to go upstairs and brush his teeth? Or am I going to walk up there with him and maybe, brush my own teeth at the same time, make it a partner activity? A really good example, I haven't thought this through, but I think a good example is laundry. Because there came a day when, as much as I love to do laundry, I could not manage all the laundry in our household anymore. And so we had to sit down and everyone's going to do their own laundry. Everyone is responsible for doing their own laundry. Okay. So independence, right? Like, you got dirty clothes, you get down there and wash them. And that's great. That's great as a family practice. In reality, the laundry room is in the basement, and neither one of our children want to go like hang out in this disgusting storage room that happens to have a washer in it by themselves. I think that we have cultivated an environment where they feel safe in there. So I'm not really sure if safety is trumping. But for them to be more successful and maybe just to feel supported, they need emotional support along the way. So we came up with this concept that we call moral support, right? So you're still responsible for doing the thing you said you would do, but we're available for moral support. So, I think what it does is it shifts, like, again, it's a reframe from like nagging your child, like, hey, you said you were going to do laundry, which increases your mental load, versus, hey, I'm noticing that you're wearing the same clothes the past 3 days. Might be a good time to do laundry. And if you need assistance in some way, I'm there for you, Maybe you could get your clothes together and then we could carry them down, as a group, as a partner. Maybe once your clothes are in the dryer, you need a reminder to get them out or need help putting them in your drawer. So it's really, on the outset, sometimes intentional living, sometimes the end result is the same as it would have been otherwise. I could nag them and convince them to do their laundry, and the laundry would get done and they would have, quote, done it on their own. But that's not in alignment with our values. So instead, we offer moral support and assistance when needed. And reminders, because they're kids, they're learning, and at the age they're in, they might not care that they've worn the same clothes for 3 days. Sometimes I don't care either, but when they start stinking, when their socks can stand up on their own, it's time to do laundry. And then just quickly, because I know I've gone way over my 30 minutes, I think another one, in addition to moral support, I think is modeling. So doing our own laundry now as this like other level of like, hey, look at me. I'm a person. I do my laundry. Anyway, still working through that one in my head, but I think that's a good example. I'm going to wrap up because I'm talking. And thank you for joining me. I hope something I said resonates with you. I would love to hear. If it did, I would love to hear about it in the comments of this video. See you next time.